So I want to give you a brief introduction on the West African Biodiversity Under Pressure project, the WASP project. As Sven told you, it's based in Mauritania. Next slide, please. We have partners, two partners so far. One is the National Institute on Fisheries and Oceanography, IMROP, and Nature Mauritanian NGO. Just a quick Mauritania in a nutshell. Mauritania has become an independent Islamic Republic in the 60s. 1 million square kilometers, so it's really a big country, but a small population relatively of only 4.3 million people, and with a very low population density, on average 3.4 people per square meters. Many of them, not most of them, are concentrated in the two biggest cities, Nouakchott, the capital, with nearly 1 million inhabitants, and in the north, Nouadhibou, with about 120,000 inhabitants. Next. So climatically spoken, it is divided by the arid Sahara and the Sahel zone in the north, which is also mostly covered by the Senegal in the south, and it has a large national park, the Parc National du Banc d'Agar. Next. And these Capricorn deserts with the trade winds, they create major oceanographic fronts, the Cape Verdean frontal zone that separates more oxygenated waters from the bisoxic waters in the south of that frontal zone, which is filled in intermediate water depths by the oxygen minimum zone, meaning fully disoxic waters, either seasonally or permanently, off the coast of Mauritania and Senegal. Next. And a quick look on the export economy shows that about most parts of Mauritania's export goes into the export of metals, of iron ores and copper. And next, please. And about 53% of the export is taken from the marine environment, which is fish and related products, of course, and about 13% of crude petroleum extraction. These data are from the repeatedly updated Atlas of Economic Complexity country-wise. So just to give you a small background. Next. And our target areas, our settings are, of course, on the right, the continental slope component, so the deeper waters of Mauritania especially. And next, please. In the shallow and coastal waters, of course, we focus on the Banc d'Agar, which has a wadden sea and shelf component. Next. Coming back to the Mauritanian deepwater coral barrier, it has a north-south extension of at least 580 kilometers. So therefore it is the largest deepwater coral barrier in the world, as we know so far. The depth range is of these coral mounds, you can see below a shaded multi-beam map. You see that these are based in the range of 350 to 650 meter water depth, which is exactly the depth range of the oxygen minimum zone, abbreviated as OMZ. The thickness of these coral mounds varies between 60 and 120 meters in height, and existing drill cores dated, radiocarbon dated, and radionuclide dated ages yield data reaching back to 170,000 years before present, but that did not reach the base of these coral mounds as yet. And a cruise to fulfill this knowledge gap was just cancelled. to drill through individual of these coral mounds. And above you see a small glimpse of the biodiversity of the coral life, fish richness, and so on. Next. This is a marine traffic image taken that day I took yesterday from Marine Traffic website, and all these orange dots aligned more or less pretty close to the coral mount barrier are fishing vessels, most of them from China, Russia, and Turkey, as far as I could identify them. Further offshore, the green dots are bulk carriers and container vessel ships, and the red dots are tankers, chemical, oil and gas, and so on. So they use the international traffic ways offshore. Next. Now I show a graph, a very famous graph from a paper from Strummer et al. Based on long-term monitoring data between Carthurian and Mauritania in the upwelling zone. There are two trends visible in this graph. First, you see the oxygen concentration in millimole per liter, and the value of 90 in the water column from the surface to the 1,000-meter water depth. That is shown on the left side. The water depth shows that the separation between oxygenated waters and disoxygenated waters or dysoxic waters is the 90 value. That, next please, that we observe a shoaling of the oxygen minimum zone, which consequently also leads to a reduction of the habitat, the pelagic habitat, especially for fishes, mid-water fishes, and so on. And next, we also see an increasing deoxygenation trend, and we have to pose the question, hypoxia to anoxia in the future, if this is not a decadal trend or because the timeline is too short. And it means, of course, also a reduction of the coral habitat when the values become too close to anoxia. Next. Again, this is the depth range of the coral systems I just told you. Next, please. Another aspect, Banc d'Arguin. It holds the largest warden sea and the largest bird resort and holds large seagrass meadows in Africa, and large parts of it are designed to the Banc d'Arguin National Park with its own authorities and guards and so on. And it's not only bird life, it's also rich and diverse underwater life. And so this is our other main working area. Next, please. There are several settlements that are populated by a small in-Mauritanian artisanal fisher folk, and they are allowed to take out seafood with their launches. Next. Part of the reality is also this, a side of the beautiful life you can find there, and that is also presented in many prospectus. The reality looks different in many places in the Banc d'Arguin and also near Nouadhibou, which also belongs to the Banc d'Arguin area. Here you see a small figure from our friend Hidi Taleb, his own NGO. And the coasts are partially fully loaded with plastic of all sorts. Mostly you see these plastic bottles. Next. And there's a list of other threats that are occurring, especially in the shallow water area of Mauritania. It's, as mentioned, plastic pollution, increasing number of toxic algal blooms that has been figured out by emerald people, long-lasting pulses of a strong jellification, also in the shallow waters, and of course pirate fishing, just to name a few. Next. And on long term, sea level rise is very effective in drowning Mauritania's lowland coastlines. Efficiently see the evolution of the coastline 5,000 years ago, when only a rise of 10 centimeters of sea level on average would mean a loss of the hinterland of about 30 kilometer land. Next, please. So the problems and knowledge gaps we experience with our Mauritanian partners is there exists no national marine GIS portal for stakeholder, the public, and the science decision making. There is so far no clever DNA barcoded and voucher collection documentation of the biodiversity, and that changes so far existing. The other point is fish resources are evaluated mostly economically, stock assessment, landings, catch rates, and so on, and not ecologically, functionally, nor biologically. It's also, it can lead to really dramatic consequences if you don't consider these aspects. And last but not least, the open sea and the coastal sea systems are so far studied separately, independently from each other, but the connections are evident and highly needed, especially the canyon head intermediate water depths between shallow and deep, so that are no closed systems by their own. Next. And this is now the only formal WASP measure slide I want to present, just with a few sentences. Our 5 measured, in blue it's written in French. First measure is setting up an open marine GIS for decision making. Second, initiating the establishment of a national coastal and marine biodiversity reference collection. In Senckenberg, especially in Frankfurt, they have great and long-lasting knowledge in how to curate and develop and maintain an internationally recognized voucher collection. Third, please. Next. DNA barcoding of marine species that is tightly linked, of course, to measure 2. And we have to initiate the establishment of a national barcode library. And IMROP has experienced strong progress, so they are now more and more able to do the work on their own. Next. 4 is developing a long-term marine research strategy. So we want to use the MeerWissen project as a seed project to establish context, to identify gap of knowledge, especially related also to public outreach, which is a term that I will soon pass to Sandra to explain it a little bit more. Despite the rich fishing impact on the economy of the Mauritanian Republic, there is no tight connection of the Mauritanian people to their ocean resources. There is limited university faculties devoted to ocean affairs right now existing. So, and developing a long-term marine strategy should aim also to improve science, to improve teaching, to improve knowledge building, of course, and also true science and linking land and sea. 5, developing communication materials and strategies for outreach. Next. And this is the point where I want to pass the word to Sandra, please.
Yes, hello. So, my name is Sandra. I'm a marine biologist by training, but I worked since 1998 mostly on the interface between marine science and policy making in Mauritania. First for the IUCN, then as consultant, and I do this work with next. So let me first elaborate further on the scenery. The ecosystems of Mauritania, marine ecosystems, are exceptional and of international importance, like already explained by Andre. And today, offshore Mauritania belongs to one of the best studied deep sea areas of the whole world. and the best studied deep sea area on the African continent. So important biodiversity hotspots like the coral reefs, but also canyon systems that act as refuges against these oxygen minimum zones in canyons. And they maintain benthic biodiversity of the slope area during the time. But also at the surface, there are clearly defined pelagic hotspots composed of plankton, small pelagic fish, but also tuna, dolphins, and seabirds gather here together. Next. So the entire slope has been put under a multi-beam by the Spanish Institute for Oceanography. Next. Next. Oh. Next. Yep. So it's not just multi-beam, but the whole area has also been sampled very vigorously. Next. And German expeditions even revealed underwater images with underwater remote-controlled vehicles, and this is how it looks like underwater. Next. And above, the biodiversity hotspots look like this. So gathering of seabirds, feeding collaborations, even blue whales have been encountered there at regular intervals, and all these areas have been mapped. Next. So it's not all blue planets out there. Like already told, there is quite some exploitation going on in this very same area. Fishing by Mauritanians, but also the EU, Russia, China, and Turkey. And also the artisanal fishing sector is increasingly fishing in the offshore deep waters. And each have all different and specific impact on this biodiversity. Next. With devastating effects, a decline by a factor of 3 of high-value table fish that are up in or belonging to the highest trophical levels, revealed by experimental trawl data by the Mauritanian Institute. Next. And you can also clearly see a decrease in trophic level. So there are regime shifts going on there towards, hopefully not, but it's heading towards jellification. Next. It's caused by overfishing of the commercial resources, but also collateral damage on the environment is surely partly responsible for this process, but it's barely taken into account by policies made to manage fisheries. Next. This is how it looks like underwater. You can see here a rough image of a trawl track by the Spanish hake and crustacean fisheries, most probably, because they fish there in those depths at these very same areas, coinciding with coral habitats. Next. This is how it looks like by the Dutch fishing fleet. They fish on small pelagic fish. And these are huge nets that virtually engulf entire pelagic ecosystems. So these are also the 1% bycatch, like the EU likes to refer to these animals. But it has been documented by scientists on board, Dutch freezer trawlers, that these bycatch rates are way above sustainable rates, and that the region runs a risk of regional extinction of quite some key species in the marine ecosystems. The Dutch abandoned the area for now. Next. But severe damage was done. This void is now filled by Turkish and Chinese fleets that also target now small pelagic fish. not for human consumption, but they transform it into fish meal for, amongst others, salmon farming in Norway or pig farming in China. Next. And also the artisanal fleet has environmental effects through monofilament nets they use that are thrown away and end up ghost fishing, but also targeted fishing for bushmeat consumption. So you have this wonderful Bangdaga protected area where bushmeat consumption of marine turtles is quite high. And a part of the fisheries done by the artisanal fleet is on sharks, which are exported to China. Next. Also, the Chinese directly are involved in targeting bushmeat. Next. Here you see northern gannets that are there with 30% of their world's population in the winter, and some of these sometimes end up frozen in the Chinese sea containers, of which a few years ago the Mauritanian customs confiscated 21 of them. First news was that they were filled with frozen seabirds, and then later on that was all denied. Next. If you want to read about it, the German press did quite an article on it in a magazine called Falke. Next. So then, on top of this, there is of course climate change, making these water warmer, less oxygenated and more acidic. Next. And marine biodiversity in this extremely rich upwelling area can either mitigate these effects if we manage to protect it better and we stop the jellification process. And if we fail to do this, this will aggravate the effects, leading to quicker jellification and maybe even overall mortification of the marine coast by overgrowth of bacteria, causing later on toxic gases and coastlines smelling of rotten eggs, which already happened a few times in Namibia. Next. And to top it all off, the area is home to one of the largest gas fields in the world that is about to be exploited by the company BP. Its installations will affect all sections of this ecosystem, from deep water to the coastal waters, and it lies on the maritime border with Senegal. Next. And to explain once to BP, who is always saying that their impacts are really small, and that the issue is fishing and that they are not the issue. And then I explained once to BP with this image using a camel as a metaphor for the marine environment in the area. Next. And that they will maybe be the final straw. Next. So preparing for action. So there's a lot of things that are known about the environment. So the scientific community developed a rescue plan. Next. First, a really bold plan in which it was proposed to protect really large areas of the slope of coral habitats, but that was rapidly dismissed. And then IMROP, together with these same people, did a voluntary initiative, and they drafted a little bit less ambitious proposal to protect at least a small but representative selection of these vulnerable benthic habitats on the slope. Only not even 1% of the total economic zone. Next. And this is how the plan looks. Next. And then there was also an initiative called the Program Biodiversity Oil and Gas, spearheaded by the Ministry of Environment, that organized a lot of activities to put biodiversity offshore on the political agenda. A lot of talks, face-to-face meetings were organized in the world of policy making, and also further research was done. Next. The results so far of all these efforts: the Mauritanian state proposed newly discovered hotspots as EPSA nomination, so ecologically and biologically significant areas, to get nomination for this in the frame of the CBD. It has absolutely no legal teeth, but it's a clear call for attention from Mauritania to the international community. Next. However, on the national level, no plans whatsoever in the make to have national policies with legal teeth. So create MPAs offshore, adapt the fishery code, make clear guidelines for environmental impact study for the oil and gas sector. Next. The protection of offshore vulnerable areas is still not mentioned in EU Mauritania fishing agreements, even though a lot of European science institutes have been involved in revealing all this information. It is not at all mentioned by its scientific committee. All marine biodiversity is just labeled as bycatch. Next. Environmental impact studies for the oil and gas sector that are being carried out at this very moment are very shaky on the scientific level. It's all drafted by private consultancy firms who have no clue what they are talking about, and they are all approved by the Ministry of Environment. Next. So apart from local fishery federations, local journalists, nobody complains about this. Not even international conservation organizations who are active there. Next. So MeerWissen is giving it another try. So our strategy now is to work only with the most hopeful actors, so with IMROP, to make this user-friendly GIS, to get it on all the computer screens so that no policymaker can ignore it any longer. Working with local NGOs and fishery federations and the press, who have proven to be cooperative in the past. And working with the young on a better future. So we created 3 blue classes along the coast with children from 8 to 15 years old, and give them talks about their natural heritage. Whiteboards, explainer videos are made that will be broadcasted on social media. Some have already been done. 2 test videos were completed. And we reach out directly to oil and gas companies to remember them of their social environmental responsibility policies, and share a lot of scientific insights with them on this host environment that are so badly evaluated by their consultants. And then, of course, keep on denouncing substandard environmental impact assessments, first via direct communication, and if they don't listen, via the press. Next. Sometimes seen as an aggressive strategy, but it's bearing fruit. So an agreement was reached now with BP to rewrite their whole environmental management plan for the gas field they plan to exploit very soon. So no infrastructures have been laid out at this moment. So it's still time to correct a lot, and hopefully one big economic player adopting all the science that has been revealed these past years could become the new standard for better marine resource use in the region. Next. So I have always a few key questions. They're maybe a bit provocative, but here they are. 1, why is the EU's blind eye for Mauritania's biodiversity, because it's completely illogical that they ignore this biodiversity, that thrive in their main fishing area, fed by a belief that its protection might hurt their short-term interests. 2, I know that a lot of Mauritanians ask themselves these very same questions, which comes to the second question too. Is the EU's blind eye for biodiversity offshore Mauritania feeding a reluctance with national regulating authorities to enforce conservation? So who will take the first step? Mauritanians are waiting for the EU. The EU is maybe waiting for Mauritania, but is that fair? Because the Mauritanians, they earn money, so if EU is not proactive, there is maybe something which is withholding it. And then 3, are international conservation organizations who have not at all been very lightly engaged to put the protection of offshore biodiversity hotspots on the political agenda. And they have absolutely been completely mute about substandard environmental impact studies that have been issued these past years. And why don't they denounce this more clearly? And then I asked myself, are the international conservation organizations too much involved with extractive industries, withholding them from denouncing malpractice? And then another one, next. And then will BP turn the tides if they will now come with a brand new and science-based management plan for the GTA gas fields, or will they be that final straw? Next. And how do we scientists that are now going to be involved with BP to redo their science-based management plan, how do we keep our independence and focus on biodiversity protection and not just on doing science? So this is where it stops.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra and Andre, for this informative presentations. And I think we have learned a lot about the marine biodiversity, or also the and the impacts BP and many other companies and are involved in this area. And yeah, and now for the discussion, maybe we can all turn on our camera. It makes it a little bit easier. I think we are a small group, and for the discussion, yeah, it's much better, I think. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. I mean, you can also type it in the chat. I think it's much better to raise your hand and then to speak up. And yeah, so said this. Do you have any questions? Yes, Birgit?
Hi, Sandra and Andre. I'm still a little bit shocked. Obviously, I know all this, but seeing this again in such a very condensed form is really shocking. And I've worked a lot on research vessels in front of Mauritania, and but obviously I have not been aware too much about the coastal situation. But I was thinking, I want to know, do you know how much money we are talking about, what the Mauritanian government gets from these fishing fleets, so that possibly needs to be compensated to make some difference? Or what other hope do you see? So it looks a little bit hopeless, but good luck. And we are working in Senegal on seaweed. Next talk, maybe we can join forces a little bit, but first of all, it's about the question of money. You know what we're talking about here?
Andre,
You're muted again, Andre.
Okay. Yes, I'm not fully aware how the cash flow in Mauritania really works. I simply do not know, and how much of the financial income of giving the fishing licenses to foreign fishery fleets, how does it go, and how much is reinvested inside or within Mauritania for the people, for the social systems, or for restoring the ecosystems. I'm not aware if these figures do officially exist. I have no idea right now. Sandra, do you know more?
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a different situation in Senegal. About 80% of the fishery resources in Mauritania is caught by the industrial fleets, and a lot of it is foreign fleets. Although there is now a tendency as well that because of stricter regulations, that foreign fleets start to reflag to national flags, so the mixed arrangements with national companies. So all of a sudden, a Spaniard is becoming a Mauritanian industrial exploiter, but it's still a Spanish owner or a Spanish business. But the European Union, yeah, there are less boats of the European Union fishing there for the moment, but the money that is paid by the European Union to the Mauritanian state is hugely important. I'm not an economist. In PIB, it's not a lot, but in foreign exchange, this has ranged from 40% of the budget to approximately 20. So it's so it's really a significant contribution to the Mauritanian state.
thank you.
That's why they are maybe also reluctant, even though they have all this information, to enforce rules on such an important financial partner. But it's just guessing. But I think that plays an important role.
Matthias?
Yes, along the same line of thought and question. I mean, we have seen the catch trajectory in one of the slides, and it looks as if the catches are dropping a lot, quite substantially over the years. This would, allow us to assume that within relatively short times, some parts of the fishery collapse economically, which would be good for the biodiversity if the fishing would stop simply because of economic collapse. But maybe this takes still some years, and by then nothing is left in the ocean. So that's of course a big danger. But the thing is, with the BP and the gas fields, I mean, if from the state perspective, if the fishery doesn't allow to get as much money from the foreign countries because the stocks are decreasing, then there will be possibly much more emphasis given to the exploitation of the gas. And so I would really not believe really very much that BP is willing to do what they say they would be doing. I mean, there is so much potential. And even it's not only BP, it's also the government, I think, that will greatly argue for using this potential and exploiting it even more under conditions of a decreased overall catch. I mean, it's a very pessimistic outlook, but this is what I would expect, actually. Is there any hope that this is not going to happen?
Sandra, please.
I don't know if I got it quite clearly, but there's something going on in the zone where BP will now exploit the gas. So on the border with Senegal, so it's also a shared benefit field between the Senegalese government and the Mauritanian government. But in that very same area, it is foreseen that they also built an extra port and maybe even another fish meal factory in the very same area. So we get indeed oil and gas and increased pressure from fisheries on top of it. So yeah, one of the ideas maybe is, and I hope we can argue this, is, for example, the first oil field that was operated in Mauritania was called the Shingeti field, operated by an Australian oil company. And strangely enough, the first idea was, well, this is the final straw, and we were just missing this. It's already, all is crashing already, and then on top of it, we will have an oil company here. But the oil company was actually the first to discover the corals there, which put my world a bit upside down. And this attracted all the research done by André late in the years after, and by the Instituto Española de Oceanografía. So this particular oil field, in terms of getting better knowledge about how this ecosystem works and hope to manage fishery resources better in the future, was actually induced by this oil company. And within the industrial fishing zone, they created a very large security area around their platform, in which André saw with his ROV that the corals restored after 10 years. There was actually coral growth taking place in this security area. So maybe this is something of a hope. So because now economic use will be diversified, there will also maybe be opportunities to get some order offshore. That could be an approach, and hopefully BP will be proactive with this. For now, they have taken on an attitude, we keep a low profile as possible, and biodiversity issues is not really, we like it for our social responsible policies and marketing purposes. But our main issue is, of course, the gas. But hopefully we can get them a little bit more proactive in making as well a huge security zone around their installations. So that is our hope, and we try to steer it into that direction. But yeah, how to keep our independence while collaborating with these people further, especially if money will become involved later on.
Are there any other questions directed to this, to BP, or to a different issue? Yes.
Can I just follow up to what Sandra just said? The last part of your comment was very interesting because you ended with a rhetorical question. I wonder if you have thoughts on an answer to that.
how to keep our independence?
Independence while collaborating, which is
While collaborating, yeah. If we have an answer on that.
well, or at least the starting formulation of what could be a model, because this is a general problem in consultancy, scientific consultancy.
Mm-hmm.
For the Mauritanian context, you have some thoughts or
Yeah, we have been giving this quite some thought since 2012, and we looked at several successful models where science worked completely independently from oil companies, but also with money from oil companies. And one of the best practice examples we stumbled on was the Prince William Sound Citizens Advisory Council in Alaska and the Shetland Council in Scotland, in which scientists work directly with representatives of stakeholders, with fishermen, local communities, and the scientists are in direct contact with. Council gives the scientific advice to the oil company. Of course, this structure is not yet in place, but with Nature Mauritanie, we are working on this, and we already had several via IUCN. Several people from Alaska and the Shetland Islands coming to the region, explaining how their model really works very well.
Thank you.
Matthias?
Yes, a short question. You mentioned the user-friendly GIS for policymakers and managers, and I'm not totally sure what I should think about of here. Is it like a marine atlas which shows the distribution of species and activities? So in order to easily visualize what is happening along the coast for everyone, or how is it organized? And that's the first part of the question. Second is it already being used by policymakers?
No, not yet. May I answer, Sandra? Not yet, so it's still in the mid-phase of development. So the final aim, and that is not to be realizable within the 2 years of the MeerWissen project. The final aim is something similar like the Norwegian Mariano marine GIS system. So they needed 20 years of strong governmental support, of course, to get it run. But we can start with bathymetric maps, especially for the deep sea. We can start with species distribution. We can start with CTD data. So the plan is to develop several layers. We can put it in a historical, retrospective, catch rates in certain areas, but also truly science-based information and publicly available information, both from the deep and from the Banque d'Arguin. And already the data collection and quality assessment of historical data is a time-consuming task of its own. Alone, one example from our deep sea coral habitats, we identified in our database so far more than 800 megafaunal and macrofaunal species at a precision never known before, if you want to nail that down to our georeference stations, and several hundreds of protists, for instance, and the biological traits are now under evaluation as well, infaunal, epifaunal, and indicative for hypoxic conditions and things like that. And that will certainly need many more years, but we are starting with individual simple maps that can also be downloaded and viewed from ordinary mobile and cellular phones at the end. That's the idea. Keep it simple first and then build on in the following years, step by step.
Okay, thank you.
Are there still questions?
Yes, one.
Really?
What is the interest of the Mauritanian population to their and the feeling of the Mauritanian population to their marine environment, to the sea?
Well, yeah, my impression is it's growing. The concern is growing because of the very active NGO work in Mauritania and the very active use of social media by these NGOs. And I'm mostly on Facebook in this respect to review what's going on with the Mauritanian environment, and the percentage of marine issues that are discussed and highlighted only on Facebook is increasing since 2 years tremendously compared to earlier years. That's my impression. But still, the Mauritanians are not a traditional fisher folk like many other people that have a long coastline. Having said this, there are, of course, thousands of artisanal fishery families spread along the coast in the big towns. When you look at the fish markets in Nouadhibou or in Nouakchott, it is impressive and shocking at the same moment. If you walk along the fish markets there, it's impressive and shocking, really. But this is only the artisanal fish market we were visited some time ago. And there also a lot of information is needed, especially under the COVID-19 pandemic. I just checked, so the infection rates in Mauritania are climbing up now. They have more than, 400 people, dead people. But right now it's climbing up steadily day by day in Mauritania. And one idea put forward by one of our partners is to go to the artisanal fisher families and inform them about how to prevent, how to install the hygienic rules we are living with here in Europe since a year or so, because they go out in their pirogues for fishing with sometimes 25, 30 people sitting very, very, very close to each other, stay out in the sea 20 miles offshore the whole night and come back early in the morning to land the catch to the fish market and so on. So there is close contact all the time, and under this situation of pandemia, probably there's also a lack of information. What does it mean? Infection, the virus, and so on. And we have one idea to support one of these NGOs to go out to the artisanal fishing villages along the coast and inform people if it's practicable to reduce the number of the crew, to enlarge the distance. Does it make sense or not? But just to start to think about that problem. Otherwise, lockdown in Mauritania, strange situation. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, Sandra. We are over time, but if you would shortly add.
Yeah, well, I can also say that on Facebook it's amazing how important Mauritanians value their marine resources and how worried they are that it's going into the wrong direction. It's of course on land is an antipode of the sea. The land is hot and it's a desert. They know what scarce resources are. Whereas the sea is cold and extremely rich. So it's like an Amazon forest and a desert next to each other, but a marine Amazon forest. And but they know what scarce resources are and how important how important that is, and the notion that the sea is endless and you can exploit it endlessly, especially in Mauritania, is actually a notion which has been promoted a lot by fishing interest from the Europeans. European development corporations, they always start the context phrase. The first phrase is these exceptionally rich waters, and they still use that phrase. And that is a notion which has been put into their heads in the 80s. And if you put marine issues on the agenda in the 90s, when I started working there, then it was like, why? This is endless exploitation here. But that notion is now fading completely, and more and more NGOs who have maybe not a lot of knowledge about the marine ecosystem come with their traditional approach of trying to manage the scarce resources also at sea, because they clearly can see the plundering, and they clearly see how it is crashing, especially in the artisanal fishing markets. The types of products which you could buy there in the 90s are not the same anymore as today. So yeah, so in that respect, I'm hopeful because of this scarcity and traditional ways of managing resources. Hopefully there will be a revival of that pretty soon.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Andre, for this great insights into the WASP project. And I think we should close it and also, of course, continue it with hope. And I think very important is that we collaborate. We have the MS Teams community here from MeerWissen, and I think maybe you can exchange on this community also with the projects from Senegal and Cape Verde, and to join forces and collaborate and can see what you can do and to change the political framework in the region. And yeah, so we have the next webinar on the 10th of March at 2 p.m. CT with the introduction of the Seaweed for Climate Change, Resilient Blue Economies and Biodiversity and Ecosystems, so-called CLIMALC project. We will send out the invitation within the next upcoming days. And for those of you who have not registered yet in the schedule, please sign up for date and time, or yeah, send me an email, and we will send out the link to join the webinar. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and yeah, we hope to see you in the future and at our next webinars. Thank you very much.